I do want you to think for a moment about 11 months back when we were starting all of this and what your year has been like. This semester for the faculty and for you, I think, has also been a time of intense learning in these workshop projects where we learn to do a kind of analysis where we combine many of the things we've learned in the different parts of the program, the science, the policy, the management, the politics, and perhaps even more important, working together and learning how to cooperate and produce a product. The faculty saw all of these briefings last week, and while we were, of course, sharply critical of everything we heard, we were actually quite impressed with what we saw. And knowing that what we're going to see today is going to be even more impressive, I'm looking forward to this morning. So if Professor Tjossem's briefer is available, let us begin.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Deng Tiancheng, and it's my honor to represent a group advised by Professor Sara Johnson and present for the final briefing here. So, our client is Grid Alternative, a nonprofit that is based in California that aims to bring the solar power to low-income households. So, this would be today's agenda. So our client, Grid Alternatives, was founded in Oakland, California back in the year 2002. So over the past 11 years, significant achievements have been made in the state of California and Colorado in terms of bringing the solar power to low-income households. More than 4,000 families have been benefited from the low-income incentives Grid Alternatives have set up with the government. And also, over $100 million in savings have been achieved. Also, our client has, through the program, bring a lot of the environmental and as well as the economic development benefits to the society. So, the current situation is that Grid Alternatives is trying to penetrate into the tri-state area, the New York State. And as it wants to set up the scene in the New York State, it asks is the solar photovoltaic, which is the solar PV on your rooftop, is reaching low-income households here in New York State? And if not, what policies could possibly make solar PV more accessible to low-income communities? So first, let's have an overview of the current solar installations situations here in New York State. I'm going to talk about this issue, from two perspectives. First, I'm going to talk about the incentives for New York State to develop solar, and also I'm going to talk about hindrances, which we focus more during our consulting project. So the major incentives is the Renewable Portfolio Standard, or RPS. Well, according to the RPS, New York State is mandated to have 30% of its energy generations by 2015 coming from the renewables. So this is a very ambitious goal. And they invest a lot of money on this. So altogether, there would be $7 million allocated to solar projects by the year 2015. And these strong initiatives was actually advocated by the Governor Cuomo, who has proposed a New York Sun initiative to further encourage the distribution of solar, which is the solar PV program, solar PV panels on your rooftop. Another incentive for New York State is the relatively higher utilities price. As you can tell, here the utilities price for residential unit are almost 20 cents per kilowatt hours, more than double than the states like in Washington, and also is one of the highest among the continental states. So given the relatively high upfront cost of the solar PV panels, the higher utility price can shorten the payback period for you to do the solar. But we have to face that there are several major barriers for New York State to develop solar as well. First, we definitely get much sun than the southwestern part of the United States. We got 1/3 less sun than in California. And also, well, you don't really need to read the chart, but it kind of speaks that there are a lot of complexities, when you want to apply the solar, when you want to get your solar installed on your rooftop. So the licensing and permitting complexities faced by the households and also utilities are the strong obstacles right here. Well, it incurred a lot of the paperwork, administrative cost. Due to our analysis, the current soft cost incurred by this is like $5 per watt, which means, average rooftop solar installation is 5 kilowatts. So, it can easily exceed $30,000 of administrative cost if you want to bring solar to a rooftop. So that's quite significant. And also, New York City has a significant presence in terms of population and economy here in New York State. So New York City is quite different from the rest of the state and also rest of the nation. It has a particular housing patterns that is featured by the large apartmental buildings and also the multi-family households. These buildings are pretty much occupied by the renters rather than the homeowners, creating another stakeholders when you apply and get solar installed. And definitely for New York State, currently we don't have any low-income specific solar programs that is established, unlike in our peer states like California, where they do have those low-income targeted programs. And I'm going to introduce a new concept here called net metering. Net metering is basically an incentive where you can get excess money, you can get excess credit for the excess electricity you generated through your solar panel and feed it back to the grid. But currently we have a cap, for the excess credit you can have, on your electricity bills. It's currently set to be 3% of the peak electricity load. And the cap is definitely not great. So upon a careful understanding of these current situations, the pros and cons, we have devised 3 methodologies to kick off our research. First, we dig into both nationwide and statewide databases to understand the current policies and incentives, as well as to collect the best practices from the remaining 49 states. And also, we dig into the solar installation databases and do the data crunching work. So we sort of examine the demographic data and also economic census. And we study over 60 counties as well as over 2,000 zip codes within New York State to try to figure out, if low-income zip codes and low-income communities are really receiving this solar power. Furthermore, we conducted over 30 key stakeholders interviews. These stakeholders ranging from utilities, governmental agencies that involved, and also other solar developers and job trainers, as well as the key policy and law experts in academia. So we asked a lot of questions about how we can better make low-income solar adoptions here in New York. So our key research findings is that, for the question, is solar PV is reaching low-income residents here in New York State? Not quite yet, because for over a quarter of the people who we characterize living in the low-income zip codes, which featured by their annual household income is only 80% of the average household income. For those 26% of people, only 7.7% of the solar installations belong to them. So that's quite a disparity. And also we figured that majority of low-income solar installations are in rural areas, as featured in this map, where our awesome GIS team has made. You can see the darker blue indicates those counties with highest low-income solar installations. And these counties, basically are in the rural and low dense populated areas. All the major cities in New York State, such as New York City, Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo, along with the most urban areas where a lot of low-income people live, they are not in general benefited from this program. So upon synthesizing our findings, we have some recommendations for our client. So in terms of what policies could help solar PV reach low-income communities, first, we have to definitely reach the net metering cap we just mentioned. And then we have to support community solar. Community solar is featured by the several properties or several households who are sharing the same solar PV panel on the rooftop. So there might be a mechanism where you can precisely split up the bills and transfer those exercise electricity access benefit evenly or proportionally to the different households. And definitely we have to simplify the permitting and the licensing procedures and reduce all the administrative costs. And for sure, we have to encourage new financing models because for low income, the upfront cost is very high. So New York State is working very hard right now to try to pool the private resources in public vehicles to finance the solar, which is a good sign for the future. And for sure, we have to learn from other states to provide incentives specifically targeting the low income. So to conclude my presentation, we figured through our research that in the past, relatively few low-income households are reached in terms of solar PV panel installation. And currently, incentives do not specifically target low-income communities per our analysis. And in the future, we have recommendations that we do believe allow grid alternatives, our client, to work with other stakeholders as well as the government to increase the solar adoption. And hopefully, while New York State can, through booming its solar presence, better achieve the renewable portfolio standards by the year of 2015. Well, this will be my presentation. Thank you very much. I'd like to take out any questions you may have regarding our program and consulting project.
Any questions?
I was wondering if with the barriers that are in place to these installations, why Grid Alternative chose to expand in New York?
Yeah. That's also a question we asked the client in the very beginning. So, I mean, they are very set up, they are pretty set up in California and Colorado, and they just want to expand to the East Coast. And, the market is kind of different, so they want to test out their new strategies. I mean, you have both the West Coast and the East Coast. You can say you are nationwide, nonprofit, something like that. Yeah, but there are definitely, given these barriers, hindrances for solar program here. So that's why we're trying to work hard with the grid.
I was wondering, in cases of low-income households where they may not own the house, they may be more likely to be renters, how a low-income household is even able to capture any of the benefit of solar PV if it's most likely the owner that's going to be owning the system and receiving whatever money is sold back to the grid.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we do examine a lot of incentives, and one of the questions we pay carefully attention to is that whether we can sort of transfer these benefits like tax incentives, tax rebates, sales tax credits, from the solar developer, which actually owns the solar PV panel, back to the renters, which are the ultimate beneficiary. So we do pay close attention, when we examine these incentives and do make recommendations accordingly to our client, on how to, ensure the benefits are reaching the ultimate beneficiaries.
Time for one more question if there is one. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.